It began on a cool October morning in 2024, the kind of day where mist hangs low over the hills and frost clings to windows. Briar Glen, a quiet, out-of-the-way mountain town nestled in the folds of the Appalachian Range, had long been forgotten by most maps and nearly everyone else. Population, 312. Not much ever happened there, till the day the entire town vanished. It happened between 3:14 and 3:17 a.m. No one outside Briar Glen saw it. But satellite imagery showed a bizarre thermal anomaly, a sudden intense drop in heat, a signature that made it look as though the entire town had been flash frozen. Then nothing. The thermal readings stabilized, but Briar Glen was gone, not evacuated, not destroyed, just ... Gone. Roads leading in ended in mist. Drones sent to investigate crashed or returned with scrambled footage. Something repelled technology. Like the town was wrapped in an invisible cloak of static. It became a national mystery, then a global one. Theories ran wild. Gas leak, terrorist attack, mass suicide, alien abduction. 1,000 investigators, no answers. And then, exactly 3 years later, it reappeared. The mist evaporated just as suddenly as it had arrived. Where trees had reclaimed the highway, fresh pavement was visible once more. The town of Briar Glen sat peacefully in the valley, every house standing, every car where it had last been parked. Only the forest seemed to hesitate, like it didn't know whether it should grow over the town or stay back. The first person to arrive was Avery Sloan, a 28-year-old cryptohistorian and amateur investigator of unexplained phenomena. She had been camping near the edge of the restricted zone when her sensors picked up strange electromagnetic fluctuations. At 3:17 a.m., her Geiger counter, EMF meter, and thermal camera all spiked at once. She was the first to see Briar Glen returned, but the town wasn't right. People stood outside their homes as if nothing had happened. They stared at the sky. Some were kneeling. Others were simply walking in circles. No one spoke. Not one person acknowledged her presence as she approached. They weren't unconscious. They weren't zombies. They were awake, alert, but lost. As if trying to remember how to be human, Avery ran a live stream from her satellite phone, the only device unaffected. Her footage showed people she later identified as town locals based on old driver's license. Photos looking 1,000 years old. Not metaphorically. Literally, their skin was dry and translucent, like worn parchment. Their eyes were clouded, but not blind. Nails, hair, even the cartilage in their noses and ears had degraded, yet somehow they remained alive, breathing, standing, blinking. One woman reached for Avery's hand. Her fingers crumbled like ash upon contact. The government moved. Within hours, the footage went viral before it could be suppressed, sparking mass hysteria. Conspiracy theorists, religious zealots, and scientific institutions alike descended on the perimeter. The term chronoaging was coin-aging at a rate incomprehensible to modern biology, or perhaps not aging at all during the disappearance, only to instantly bear its effects upon return. The government secured the town and built a dome over it within a month. The outside world was told it was a chemical quarantine zone. Only a select few scientists were granted access. Avery was not among them. Her credentials were revoked, and she was labeled a hoaxer, her footage declared digitally manipulated. But she didn't stop. She'd seen the woman's face up close, and what she noticed, the thing that no one else seemed to catch, was that the woman had pupils shaped like hourglasses. 5 years passed. Briar Glen became a forbidden topic in academic circles. Satellite views were pixelated, so anyone who even tried to document it was threatened with legal action or worse. But Avery had never forgotten. She built a small underground network of researchers, whistleblowers, and rogue scientists. She called them the Vestige. They began collecting historical anomalies connected to time slips, ancient aging myths, and mass disappearances. Strangely, there were patterns. Towns mentioned in Babylonian tablets that disappeared for a breath. Of Enlil returned gray, Viking sagas of villages frozen in the eyes of time. A village in 1600s Prussia that emerged from a fog with all inhabitants aged beyond death. The deeper they looked, the clearer the picture became. Briar Glen wasn't the first, and it might not be the last. Then came the signal. One night, one of the vestiges monitors hidden near the dome picked up a frequency. A pattern, not noise, language. At first it sounded like data packets, then rhythmic pulses, then an almost musical structure. Avery used a neural decoder on it, and the translation made her blood freeze. We have walked through time unmeasured. Our bodies aged, but we remember nothing. The eye opens again. Soon, you will join us. The crack in the dome started as a hairline fracture barely visible to satellites. But within 3 hours, it had widened into a gaping wound, as though something from inside the town had pushed outward with unstoppable force. Military drones were dispatched to investigate, but the first 3 disappeared mid-air. The 4th streamed just 10 seconds of footage before vanishing. A shadow. Immense and fluid rising from the center of Briar Glen. Then static. That was enough for Avery. She knew the time for waiting was over. Dressed in radiation gear and armed with modified sensors and spectral imaging devices, Avery slipped past the outer perimeter with help from the vestige. The government had thinned its security recently, perhaps because they believed the dome would hold. But now, panic was setting in. As she crawled beneath a rusted fence behind a pine grove, she could feel the air change. But it wasn't just colder. It was heavier. Time itself seemed to drag inside the dome. Briar Glen looked like a city trapped between centuries. Half the buildings were deteriorated, collapsed as if 1,000 winters had passed through them. Others looked untouched, pristine still, glowing faintly under porch lights that hadn't burned out. Townspeople were nowhere in sight. No birds, no wind. No sound, only silence, and the soft, pulsing glow coming from the old church at the town center. Avery moved cautiously through the streets, her boots crunching on what looked like crystallized ash. On one wall, someone or something had carved a symbol, 2 intersecting circles, like a solar eclipse in motion. She recognized it. The vestige had cataloged the same symbol etched into a stone slab discovered near Lake Titicaca. Dated to 3000 BCE, she followed the flickering light toward the church. As she drew closer, the glow intensified, accompanied by an odd rhythmic vibration like a heartbeat buried beneath the ground. The church's double doors stood open. Inside was no longer a place of worship. It was a chamber of time. Floating in the center of the sanctuary was a black sphere, nearly 5 feet in diameter, rotating slowly. Its surface wasn't smooth. It was shifting, like a living pool of ink. Round it stood a ring of townspeople, their skin aged to near transparency, their bodies trembling but alive, and they were whispering one single word, over and over. Sundering, Avery. Approached, barely breathing. Her camera was running, her heart racing. Suddenly, the sphere pulsed, tanned. One of the townspeople dropped to their knees. Avery watched as their bodies shimmered, then reversed. Skin tightened. Color returned. Wrinkles faded. They aged backward, but not completely. Just enough to become human again. The man stood up slowly, his eyes locked on Avery's. "Do you hear it?" he asked, his voice brittle. She opened her mouth to speak, but the sphere pulsed again. The vision slammed into her skull. She wasn't in the church anymore. She stood in a vast white expanse. Above her, a fractured sky bled through shifting constellations. Mountains of glass rose and fell like waves. The wind spoke in languages she didn't understand, but recognized from dreams. Then she saw them, the watchers, tall, indistinct shapes stood in the distance, draped in robes of shadow and stars. They held devices that glowed like dying suns. One reached toward her, and the vision shattered. Avery fell backward into the church, gasping. The man caught her, his skin warm now, his pupils still hourglass-shaped. "They let us go," he whispered, but only so others would follow. The sphere is a gate. It's not just across time, but into something else. Something watching. He began to shake violently. His skin darkened. His mouth opened in a silent scream and, Then he disintegrated into dust. The others did not react. They continued whispering, sundering, sundering. Avery backed away. Whatever had happened in Briar Glen had not ended. It had only entered another phase. The gate the sphere was still open, still feeding on time, on consciousness. And it was calling. Her Geiger counter clicked violently. Her spectrometer displayed impossible readings. Behind her, the dome rumbled again this time, cracking like thunder. Outside, the ground split open, and from the fractures, something began to emerge. Meanwhile, in a remote NASA listening post in Antarctica, a transmission came through on a previously dormant frequency. The operator on duty was asleep. The signal repeated 3 times before being autologged and translated. Subject 312 failed containment. Phase 1 complete. Preparing next location. Sedlik, Czech Republic. Coordinates uploaded. Sundering begins. The AI flagged it as a hoax and deleted it from the system. But 12 hours later, the bones in the Sedlik ossuary over 40,000 the ground beneath Briar Glen cracked open like a wound, raw and smoldering. Ash and steam billowed upward, mixing with the pulsing light from the sphere inside the church. Avery sprinted from the sanctuary as the very fabric of the town seemed to unweave around her. Time was no longer linear. Here she passed a tree in full bloom, then an autumn's red, then leafless, then gone. She was inside a breach. Behind her, the sphere's hum deepened into a guttural chant. The aged townspeople still stood whispering. The same word, sundering. But their voices were no longer alone. Something else had joined them, something that did not breathe. Outside, Avery clambered over the cracked pavement of Main Street. Buildings twisted in and out of shape. Coffee shop transformed into a medieval cottage, then a glass and steel tower, before vanishing altogether. She dropped her bag and dug out a small transmitter. The signal was weak, but if she could get it working Sloan to Vestige HQ, she hissed into the mic. Briar Glen is destabilizing. The sphere is a gate it's pulling in time, compressing it. There are watchers. They're real. The sundering is real. Silence, then static, and then a voice. We see you. Avery froze. It wasn't her team. The transmission was coming from inside the time fracture. Far away in Prague, Czech Republic, a tourist guide was walking a group of visitors through the Sedlik ossuary, the famed bone church decorated with human skulls and femurs. At 3:17 p.m. local time, the bones began to rattle. It started subtly, like wind against an old window pane. Then a femur fell. Then a skull cracked. The chandelier made from pelvis bones began to spin slowly, unnaturally. The guide laughed nervously. Assuming it was an earthquake, until the walls bled a thin black mist, and one of the skulls spoke. It did not move its jaw, did not animate. But the sound came from within. Sundering phase initiated. Subject 312 fragmented. Time path infection spreading, the guide screamed. 2 tourists fainted, but when an old man in a black coat simply nodded and said, "It's begun again." Back in Briar Glen, Avery ducked into the burned-out shell. Of a general store? Her hands shook as she injected herself with a neural stabilizer from her kit. She had maybe 15 minutes before the time distortions scrambled her memory. She pulled out her data drive and began uploading footage, everything she'd captured. She had to get it out, to anyone. A sound broke the silence. Not a footstep, not a voice. A bell. It rang once. Then again, then continuously. But there were no churches left. Not anymore. Avery peeked out. At the center of town, where the church had once stood, now stood a monolith, a massive obsidian pillar, etched with ancient looping script. Floating around it were the townspeople, now lifted off the ground. Orbiting the monolith like debris caught in the gravity of a dying star, and from the cracks in the earth, figures began to crawl out. Not human, not beast, something between time and thought, their limbs elongated and bent in wrong directions. Their eyes flickered like old reels of film. They moved toward the monolith, drawn to it like insects to flame. As they moved, the town aged further. Avery watched as a lamppost rusted, collapsed, and turned to dust in. A span of seconds, her breath fogged with unnatural chill. Her time here was almost up, then her receiver buzzed alive again. Vestige to Sloan came a desperate voice. "We read you. Signal patch in place. You have 10 minutes. Upload now." Avery didn't waste a second. She plugged her drive into the transmitter and initiated the sequence. Terabytes of anomalous data flowed outward through hidden satellite relays, enough to blow the entire cover-up wide open. Then she turned her eyes toward the monolith again, and it turned back. She didn't move. COULD. And single quotes, the monolith wasn't just a structure. It was conscious. It noticed her. She felt it scanning, her reaching, into her memories, her fears, her thoughts. It wasn't malevolent in the human sense. It simply was, like gravity, like entropy. And it spoke not aloud, but directly into her mind. "You are a fracture point. The sundering has begun. Paths converge in the final hourglass." She staggered backward. Behind her, a shape loomed. A man, no version of a man, wearing a 19th century coat, top hat melted into his skull. Skin made of etched stone. His eyes hourglasses just like the others. He extended a hand. "Avery Sloan," he said, voice like sand sliding over glass. "We've met before. You simply don't remember yet." She stepped back, breath ragged. "Who are you?" The man calling himself the archivist stood unnervingly still. "I am the archivist," as though movement was something he had learned long ago but had since outgrown. His body shimmered faintly, as though not entirely anchored to one moment in time. Even the air around him crackled with quiet energy like a failing power grid. Avery clenched her fists, trying to keep her breathing steady. The figures circling the monolith, the floating townspeople, had begun to chant again. But now the word had changed. No longer just sundering. Now they whispered, "Archivim." "I don't know you," Avery said, backing up slowly. Her boots skidded on cracked glass and frozen ash. "I don't want to know you." The archivist tilted his head with almost mechanical curiosity. "You knew me in the last cycle, and the one before that. Time is less of a road and more of a mirror. You're walking backward toward your future." "What do you want?" she demanded. "To show you what they left behind," he replied, and touched her forehead. Her mind exploded into a kaleidoscope of images. She fell into them like water, a stone temple at the edge of a cliff, suspended over a black ocean with stars beneath the waves. Thousands of towns, enchanted, modern, futuristic, all collapsing into themselves, vanishing in identical bursts of mist. Time fracturing like glass, with people screaming as they aged in seconds or regressed to infants. And at the center of every scene, the monolith, then one final image, Avery herself, standing at the center of an empty city, surrounded by hourglass-eyed beings. And behind her, written in impossible script, the words, "Archivim Solaris, recorder of all ends." Gasped as the vision ended, her knees buckling. The archivist reached out again. "You've been chosen not to stop the sundering, but to document it." "No," she said weakly, standing. "I'm not your recorder." "You already are," he said simply. "The transmission you sent your data is the first page of the archivum." Avery's eyes widened. "That's why the towns keep vanishing. Why they come back aged and broken. It's not a curse. It's a collection." "Correct," he said. "Every town taken is archived in time, not space, stored in an ever-expanding vault outside causality," the Watchers observe. "I record, you translate. I didn't ask for this. No one ever does," the archivist said. "Yet hear you." R. Outside, the monolith pulsed once more, and the ground beneath it cracked fully open. From it, roots emerge, made plant roots, but strands of time, glowing golden and twitching like living nerves. They reached into the sky, to the void above the clouds. Something responded. A shape blotted out the stars. Even the archivist looked upward. "It begins," he said. Avery turned to run, but the town had changed again. Now it was a war zone. Buildings flickered between ruin and pristine form. Gravity pulsed sideways. She ran anyway, heart thundering. The street names were different now, foreign. She turned down what should have been Pine Street and found herself in ancient Rome, stone columns, skylit by torches. Then it all burned away in a flash. Of white, she ducked into a ruined gas station, breathing hard. Her camera was still running. She needed to get out. Suddenly, her comms flared. "Sloan, you're back online. Receiving the stream. What the hell is happening?" It was Victor Hale, her closest ally in the vestige. "Victor," she gasped. "Listen. Whatever this is, it's collecting pieces of time. Towns, people, memories. The sundering isn't destruction. It's harvesting." There was a pause. "We just got a signal from Malaysia. An entire village disappeared, then reappeared, aged 500 years in 10 seconds. It's spreading," she whispered. "No," Victor said. "It's synchronizing." A second voice came over the channel. "We believe it's following ley lines," said Dr. Assay, one of their occult engineers. "Ancient rootsmiths thought they were magic, but maybe they were temporal channels. Your location, Briar Glen, was a convergence point." "How do I shut it down?" Avery cried. But before Osei could answer, the archivist appeared in the doorway. "You don't," he said calmly. "You catalog." And then he vanished. Silence then, from behind her a whisper knot. "Human? A child, miss?" She turned. It was a boy, maybe 10 years old, clutching a toy train, barefoot, standing alone in the shifting ruin. His skin wasn't aged. His eyes weren't hourglasses. He looked normal. "What's your name?" Avery asked. He looked up. "At her? I don't remember," he said. "But I know I wasn't here before. I was sleeping in Boston. I went to bed in my apartment. Then I woke up here." Her blood ran cold. Briar Glen wasn't just returning. It was absorbing others now. The boy looked so out of place in the nightmare-scape of Briar Glen barefoot. Clutching a plastic toy train, his pajamas dirty but intact. Avery knelt slowly, trying not to alarm him, though the wind that hissed through the fractured town made everything feel like a ghost's breath. "You said you're from Boston?" she asked gently. He nodded. "My mom put me to bed. I was scared of thunder. Then I was here." Avery's stomach turned. "When did you go to sleep?" The boy looked up at the sky. "Last night." She blinked. "And do you know what day it is today?" He shrugged. "Monday?" Avery glanced at her watch, then tapped it. Time scrambled, digits flipping erratically between years, centuries, and even eras. But one thing was clear. It had been 2 weeks since Briar Glen. Fractured open, and the boy had been pulled across both time and geography. Back at Vestige HQ. Victor Hale stared at the boy's live feed. "He's not the only one," he said grimly. "We're getting scattered reports now, missing persons found in places they never visited. A girl from Lagos walked out of a wheat field in France. A man from Tokyo appeared in the ruins of Petra. All of them say the same thing. They just woke up there." "Temporal drag," Dr. Assay murmured. "The sunderings pulling fragments into its central mass. These aren't abductions there. Involuntary grafts." A satellite technician turned, pale-faced. "One more thing. They're all children." Avery heard this through her transmitter and looked down at the boy. "Why kids?" The boy tugged at her coat. "I heard the shadows whispering," he said. "They said we dream louder." Suddenly, a low rumble shook the ground beneath their feet. The sky above cracked in ribbons of gold and violet lightning. Avery grabbed the boy's hand. "We need to move." They darted through the collapsed skeleton of what used to be Briar Glen's post office. Letters rained down around them, some dated 1901, some marked with symbols that didn't belong to any known alphabet. The structure flickered between time-state stone, the brick, steel, glass-like. It couldn't decide which version it wanted to be. Then they emerged into the square again, and Avery froze. The monolith had grown. It now towered hundreds of feet high. Black as night, its surface crawling with time runes. Around it, the floating townspeople had multiplied. But they weren't alone anymore. Children, dozens of them, hovered above the cracked earth, asleep with eyes open. Their mouths were moving, whispering dreams into the air. feeding the monolith with a steady stream of sound and thought. There. Using the children to stabilize the breach, Avery whispered. Not just feeding on them, but anchoring time with them. The boy looked up at her. Can we go home now? I don't think home exists anymore. Not the way you remember. She said. But I'll find a way out. Then, a scream. Not from a child, but an adult. A woman, aged nearly to dust. Fell from the sky and landed near the base of the monolith. Her body trembled violently. Avery ran to her side and gently turned her over. The woman's eyes flicked open-end. Avery recognized her. Mayor Delia Rook. She had been in office before the original vanishing in 2024. Mayor, Avery asked, can you hear me? The woman's lips cracked as she tried to speak. It's not the children's fault, she gasped. They didn't choose. The eye needed clarity. The old souls were too noisy. The children, sang in time. What? Eye? Avery asked. The eye beyond the sundering, Delia choked out. It sees. It learns. It wants. To become. Her voice failed. She went still. A gust of wind blew her body into a fine scatter of ash. Suddenly the monolith shivered, and then it spoke. Not in words, but in cascading thoughts and pulses broadcast. Directly into Avery's mind and into the minds of everyone connected to the vestige. Across the globe, people who had been touched by the anomaly heard the same message. Your world was never fixed. It was always a ripple in the pool of becoming. The children will become the map. You will become the ink. The boy beside Avery clutched his chest. His toy train dropped from his hands. His eyes glazed over and golden lines began to form across. His skin, like a living constellation. Avery, he asked, terrified. Am I going to sleep again? No, she whispered, holding him tight. You're going to stay awake. But even as she said it, she wasn't sure she could keep that promise. Far above Briar Glen, in orbit, a black object shimmered into view. Not a satellite, not a ship, a second monolith. It faced Earth like an eye, now open, and from its surface came new coordinates, a new town, a new time. The sundering was not a single event. High above Earth, a pattern, far beyond the atmosphere's grasp page. The second monolith rotated slowly in orbit. Jet black, seemingly unanchored, it reflected no sunlight, only absorbing and distorting the space around it. Its shape wasn't stable. Flexed. In dimensions that didn't obey human perception, sometimes a cube, sometimes a needle, sometimes a looping spiral. Every 17 seconds, it emitted a signal, a low, thrumming pulse that vibrated through satellite arrays, disrupted long-wave radio, and hijacked deep space listening posts. And then it sent coordinates, 38.7, 2 to 3N, 9.1393W Lisbon, Portugal 3 days from now. Back in Briar Glen, Avery knelt beside the boy, her arms wrapped tightly around his small, trembling frame. The constellation-like lines across his body glowed, faintly, pulsing in sync with the monolith's hum. She watched the pattern stabilize into a single symbol, shifting hourglass, surrounded by ancient script. Are you in pain? She whispered. The boy shook his head. I feel far away. Stay here, she said, with me. But she knew he was slipping, not physically, but in some deeper way, becoming a conduit. Around them, the town was dissolving in layers. Lamps bent into strange shapes. Time rippled across storefronts, causing signs to flash in languages from different centuries. Dogs barked in reverse. Shadows moved before the light that cast them. She activated her transmitter. Vestige HQ. This is Sloan. You see the new coordinates? Affirmative, Victor's voice crackled through. We've confirmed Lisbon is next. We have less than 72 hours, she said. The second monolith is already aligning. It's acting as a stabilizer across the globe, building a grid. Like connecting nodes, ASA added, joining the call. A temporal lattice. They're weaving Earth into a new chronology. Rewriting. It's history from the outside in. They're not just collecting time anymore, Avery whispered. They're about to override it. Inside Vestige's underground archive. A team of linguists finally cracked the pattern on the monolith's surface, using a blend of ancient Sumerian, Mayan glyphs, and quantum symbology. The translation chilled them. Archivum Solaris. Stage 2. Integration of memory field begin replacement of linear time with radial continuity input points. Human children purpose. Persistence of the watchers they're not invading, said. They're upgrading reality to their specifications. Avery knew they needed leverage something to counter the monolith's reach. She turned to the only figure who might hold the answers. The archivist. Show yourself. She shouted into the roiling sky. If I'm part of this SIF, I'm your scribe, or your translator, then you need me. Come now. He appeared behind her without sound, still dressed in his antique topcoat, still carved like a statue of time itself. You called. He said, You said I'm the fracture point. Why? Because you remember differently, he replied. What does that mean? You've survived a cycle before. You don't know it yet, but your memory is folded compressed. Soon it will return. Avery narrowed her eyes. The monoliths, the watchers seek continuity. They are archivists like me but greater. They consume not to destroy, but to preserve. The old timeline is fragile. They are building a more durable one. By stealing our children, by bending time around them. The archivist turned to the boy, whose glowing skin now pulsed with soft music. They are not stealing. They are recruiting. Suddenly, a deafening screech tore through the sky. The monolith above Briar Glen fractured, its surface rippling as something forced its way through. Shaped a being. A watcher, it descended slowly, not on wings or limbs, but suspended. In its own gravitational field, 7 eyes in a vertical row, K-body made of symbols, clockwork, and flowing dark silk. It landed without touching the ground. Everything stopped. No wind, no sound. The children opened their mouths in unison and spoke with one voice. The eye has opened. The time of unmaking begins. Avery's mind split. She saw every version of Briar Glen the town in the 1800s. In 2024, in 3127, she saw herself in every one, always watching, always running, always resisting. The archivist placed a hand on her head, remember? And she did. She saw herself as a child in a different town, Willow Park. 1997. She remembered going to bed one night and waking up in a snow-covered field. Time had blinked then too, but no one believed her. Her parents said she was gone for 3 days. She was part of an earlier experiment. She had already been chosen. I was the first child, she whispered. The archivist nodded. You survived and grew. You held your memories in lockdown. But they are awakening now, just as the eye demands. Avery stood. Something inside her shifted. Words began to form behind her. His language is older than sound. The power of the children had the voice of dreaming it. Lived inside her too. She looked up at the watcher. It looked back and flinched. The archivist turned to her, solemn. If you speak now, you will disrupt the sundering. You can fracture their continuity. And if I don't, Earth becomes a library. Every soul a data point. Every moment a preserved scene. Trapped in eternal review. The air was silent. Avery raised her hand with the weight of what could not be spoken. The sky began to unravel. Yet all things waited to hear. The watcher stood unmoving, its body coiled with symbols that floated around it like orbiting moons. It had no face, no mouth, yet it breathed. Time bent inward wherever it stepped. Beside Avery, the boy clutched her hand as if instinct told him she was the only solid thing left in the world. Avery's lips moved unconsciously at first. Ancient syllables rose from her throat, shaped by memory more than intention. She spoke in a tongue no human had taught her, yet one she had once screamed in her sleep as a child. It was the language of dreaming, and the world around her listened in. Lisbon, on a narrow cobblestone street near the Geronimo's monastery, tourists and locals alike stared upward in stunned silence. A black fissure had appeared in the sky. Through it, people saw things they could not name, moments that hadn't happened yet, children not yet born, cities built of light and glass and impossible curves. Then it began to rain backward. Not water, but memories. Visions of past lives. Forgotten fears. Collective ancestral echoes. The sundering had begun early. Inside Briar Glen, the monolith shuddered. Its smooth surface fractured, spider-webbing under the force of Avery's voice. The chanting townspeople froze. The hovering children opened their eyes, and for the first time, they were not empty. The boy beside Avery looked at her with clarity, his golden skin dimming. "What are you saying?" he whispered. Avery placed her palm on his forehead. "I'm reminding the world that we are not stories to be stored. We're dreamers, not data." The Watcher took a step forward, and the earth folded inward beneath its feet. But Avery did not stop speaking. In every region that had experienced a fracture, villages in Indonesia, Siberia, Brazil, children woke up screaming, then speaking. In the same dream language Avery now channeled, their parents wept, terrified, but the children were smiling. The Watchers were losing coherence. Their lattice, once a perfect net of preserved moments, began to unravel at the seams, one by one. The monoliths dimmed, but the orbital one above Earth burned brighter. The archivist appeared once more beside Avery, though this time he looked different, younger, human again. The rigid clockwork around his limbs had faded. His eyes were not hourglasses now, but mirrors. "You've weakened the anchor," he said. "The eye will retaliate." "I'm not afraid," Avery said, trembling anyway. "You should be," he whispered. "The eye doesn't speak, it replaces. If it can't preserve, it will rebuild everything. Time, memory, even identity. You're breaking the system. Now, it will strike back, not with force, but with forgetting." Suddenly, Avery's memories flashed. Like lightning inside her skull, she saw her mother's face, then lost it. She saw her own childhood bedroom, then couldn't recall its color. Her mind flickered, pixelated, trying to hold on to self. The Watcher raised one hand, a symbol appearing on its palm. Infinity, the world began to fade. And then the children began to sing, not in fear, not in imitation, but in harmony with Avery. Their voices joined the dream, language rising, looping, layering like spirals of music across dimensions. One by one, the glowing lines across their skin turned blue, no longer infected with time's cancer. But now self-authored. They weren't being preserved. They were rewriting the archive. Avery gasped as power rushed through her. Not electricity, not energy. Authorship, she realized then, what the dream language truly was. Not a spell, not resistance, but the raw code of reality. Hidden in the subconscious of children because only untrained minds could hold the chaos without fear. The Watchers had made a fatal mistake. They had used dreamers as anchors, but dreamers were also creators. The second monolith in orbit began to fracture. Its sleek form cracked like porcelain. Bursts of white and gold spilled into space. Coordinates it had planned for Lisbon scattered into unreadable static. At Vestige HQ, Victor shouted over the comms, "They're failing. The grid is falling." "Apart," Osei's voice followed. "Avery, whatever you're doing, don't stop." Avery turned toward the Watcher. "You wanted stories," she said. "Here's mine." She stepped forward and spoke one final word in the language of dreaming. A word lost from the tongues of men, but once known to all hearts. Unremember. The Watcher folded inward. The monolith shattered into dust. The townspeople collapsed, unconscious but alive. The children drifted gently to the ground, their eyes closing in peace. And the sky turned silent again. Then came the whisper from the void. One last breath from the eye itself, not forgotten. Only delayed. Dreamers write new loops, but we are patient. Avery turned her gaze skyward. When the monolith in Briar Glen crumbled into dust, new stars were something forming. Ancient and boundless was unspooled. Monoliths, not just within the town, but across the timelines it had wrapped itself around. In dozens of places across Earth, flickering fractures sealed, shut. Children awoke, dazed but unharmed. The distorted flow of time slowed to a crawl and stabilized. For a moment, just one Earth was quiet, but Avery knew better. The eye hadn't been destroyed. It had simply retreated in the center of Briar Glen. The ground where the monolith once stood had transformed. Not into soil, not stone. It became a door, circular, metallic, with layers that moved like iris shutters. Pulsing faintly with blue light, Avery approached it cautiously. The boy followed her, now fully awake and glowing no longer. His name had returned to him. Liam. He remembered his mother, his apartment, the thunderstorm. But he also remembered other things that had never happened but felt true. He remembered being spoken to by the monolith in his dreams. He remembered being told,
"Oh,
"You will help her open the final archive." The archivist reappeared. Though now with no robes, no illusions, he looked tired, fully human. His voice had lost its cosmic echo. "You broke their structure," he said to Avery. "You spoke the dream code and rewrote your branch of time." "So they're gone?" she asked. He shook his head. "No, they've only receded. When dreamers take control, the eye cannot overwrite. But the eye remembers everything, even this moment. It will adapt." "What is this door?" Liam asked. Archivist stepped forward. "This is the place between memory and meaning. You might call it a library, but not built of shelves and books. It's a library of living stories, people, places, timelines, all folded together. And why is it here?" "'Cause you opened it," he said, looking at Avery. "You rejected preservation. But the stories must still go somewhere. The library accepted your refusal and offered an alternative." With a soft hiss, the iris door spiraled open. Inside was impossible space. Vast corridors stretched out in all directions. It's not physical hallways, but moments. Threads of memory woven into tunnels of light. They hummed like wind chimes and flickered, like starlight. Avery stepped inside, instantly felt herself split. She was both here and not here. She was a child on a bike. She was an old woman, holding a dying world. She was sleeping in her mother's arms. She was standing at the edge of a collapsing galaxy. Each version of herself was catalogued, placed not as a prisoner, but as proof. The archivist's voice echoed beside her. "This is the library beyond time. The Watchers built it long ago as a vault to contain divergent realities. They believed that, by observing and archiving, they could impose order. But you," he looked at Avery, then at Liam, "you've proved that the archive must evolve, not just observe." Avery turned to him. "Then what happens now? You decide. The library is open. Do you seal it away, or do you walk its halls, guiding what comes next?" "Why me?" "'Cause you've dreamed louder than anyone." In orbit, where the second monolith had collapsed, a signal was intercepted by vestige satellites. It was not hostile. It was a request. Access granted. Awaiting next dream. The signal originated not from the remains of the Watchers, but from inside the library. A splinter faction, rogue archivists. Dreamers who had once been children, now grown into curators of their own stories. Victor Hale, watching the data roll in from Vestige HQ, turned to Dr. Osei. "She did it," he whispered. "She rewrote the rules." Osei nodded. "But if the library is truly open, it means others will find it too." In the deepest hall of the library, Avery and Liam found a room made of unwritten parchment. In its center was a desk, inkpot, and blank page. "This is yours," the archivist said. "Every dreamer gets a book. But you get to choose which. Stories survive." Avery picked up the pen. It was warm. It pulsed like a heart. Liam looked up at her. "Can we write one where everything is normal again?" She smiled. "We can write one where we remember why it matters, above Earth." The stars shifted slightly one by one, blinking in new configurations. Not constellations, sentences, and far. Beyond the galaxies, in the vast dark silence between dimensions. The eye narrowed, watching from a distance, waiting, because even in defeat, it was still a witness, still watching. Avery sat for now. The dreamers wrote freely, and the blank parchment before her seeming to stretch into infinity. The ink pot beside her shimmered with more than just color, it held memory itself. Every word written would not just be recorded. It would be embedded into the fabric of time. She dipped the pen. The moment the nib touched the page, reality shifted. A breeze passed through the library, not air, but consequence. Corridors trembled slightly, as if every word she wrote altered their course. This was not metaphor. This was power. Authorship as architecture. The archivist stood behind her. Silent, reverent, "You must be careful," he said at last. "The ink is drawn from memory years. There's everyone's. What you write can stitch wounds, or open new ones." Avery nodded, her eyes scanning the vast white canvas of the page. "Then I write not to control, but to remind." She began. Her story: once there was a town that vanished not because it was forgotten, but because it remembered too much. In its silence, the world screamed. In its return, the dreamers awoke. Elsewhere on Earth, the changes rippled in Briar Glen. The shattered monolith's ashes began to move, not gathering, not rebuilding, but fading. Its presence was no longer needed. The people began to stir. Those who had aged 1,000 years in minutes now breathed normally again. Their bodies began to regenerate, layer by layer. They would remember nothing, but they would feel something had changed. And the children, they opened their eyes, began to hum the dream language like a lullaby. At Vestige HQ, data streams poured in, timelines stabilizing, memory bleeds halting, cross-temporal echoes resolving into silence. It was like waking from a collective fever. Ase leaned over a monitor. "The eye signal is gone." "Quiet." Victor nodded. "No new coordinates. No new monoliths." A pause. "But the stars. They've changed." He pointed to the screen above Earth. Subtle constellations had bent ever so slightly. Rearranged like text in a cosmic manuscript, they now spelled out a phrase in ancient Sumerian, then Greek, then binary. "Write carefully, in the library." Avery paused her writing. The parchment before her had filled with vivid golden glyphs that pulsed softly living text. As she lifted the pen again, Liam tugged her sleeve. "Do I get to write too?" She smiled and handed him a smaller page. "You already have, every time you dreamed. But now you can shape what stays." He grinned and began writing. "Stormed out a door that opens only when you're afraid, but leads somewhere warm." He wasn't writing stories. He was writing feelings, and the library accepted them, corridors shifting again to make room. Suddenly, the walls flickered. A darkness swept over one wing of the library, a soft shadow that didn't belong to light. But too forgetting, the eye had not attacked, it had withdrawn. And in its retreat, it had taken things with it. Avery turned to the archivist. "What was that?" "The cost," he said solemnly. "When you reject the eye, it doesn't simply vanish. It consumes something in return. One memory, one person, one truth." Eased. Avery's breath caught in her throat. "What did we lose?" The archivist looked away. "I don't know. That's the point. It's gone. And no one remembers what." It was... The room fell silent. Even Liam looked shaken. Was it someone important? Avery's hand trembled. "Yes," she said. "Because everything is important to someone." She turned back to the page and added a line. "The greatest loss is the one we cannot name." Ink shimmered mourning in silence. Later, as the corridors of the library shifted into soft night, Avery stood at the edge of the chamber, gazing into the unwritten halls ahead. Each one led to a potential, a story not yet lived, a future she could not predict, but she held the pen and Earth. Now unbound from the eye's loop had become a blank slate. She whispered to the void, "We aren't archives, we're authors." It began somewhere with far beyond the stars, then a flicker of morning light, once, then the birds, then quietly they returned to Briar Glen just before sunrise. Their wings cut through a sky that no longer bent. The mist that had clung to the town for nearly a decade drifted into the woods, never to return. Time, it seemed, had settled. The town had not been erased. It had not aged or reset. It had remembered. The people of Briar Glen awoke in their homes, confused but alive. Their faces no longer bore the weight of centuries. Their bodies felt normal, whole. Some stood in doorways, blinking at the familiar streets. Others found their calendars inexplicably dated July 19th, 2025. The day everything returned, no one spoke. Of the years they'd lost, most couldn't remember them, but now and then someone would pause, feel a deep, inexplicable grief. Like they'd forgotten the name of a child who never existed, or dreamed of a voice they never heard, but missed terribly. Avery stood at the edge of town, looking down from a quiet hilltop where the monolith had once pierced the sky. Now it was grass, soft, untouched. Liam stood beside her, wearing a coat a few sizes too big and holding a notebook. He had filled it with scribbles drawings of stars with eyes, trains that could fly, and shadowy towers that dripped ink, you'd think. "They're really gone?" he asked. "No," Avery replied. "But they're not in charge anymore." Liam nodded slowly. "Good." Behind them, the last remnants of the library beyond time folded shut. The great halls receded into the folds of reality, hidden from view, but not forgotten. It had not vanished, it had chosen to sleep. Its door still existed, somewhere deep within the minds of dreamers, and the pen still existed. Avery had returned it to the library. She didn't want to be the sole author of the future. The right belonged to everyone. At Vestige HQ, the world's strangest data center fell still for the first time in months. No more fracturing coordinates, no watcher signals. Anomalous. Aging patterns. Victor Hale stared at his empty monitor with a strange sense of loss. "Is it really over?" Ace asked beside him. "Nothing that large ends," Victor said. "It just becomes part of the story." He placed a hand on the glass wall of their data vault, where the names of every fractured town had been etched.
One remained glowing.
Glen. Underneath it, a new word had been added. Returned. 3 days later, Avery visited the town square, where children now played freely again. None of them glowed, none chanted in ancient tongues. But sometimes, just for a moment, one of them would hum a tune that didn't exist, a dream language lullaby. Avery sat on a bench and smiled. The Watchers had tried to preserve time by trapping it, but dreamers had taught time to sing. That night, Liam left a note on Avery's windowsill. It was written in crooked letters, but one line stood out. "If the library comes back, let it be a playground." Above Earth, in the deep dark where the stars rarely blink, something shimmered, a final watcher, alone now, drifting in silence. It held no power, no archives, only a single golden sheet of memory. It looked down at Earth and, for the first time in its eons-long existence, smiled. Briar Glen became a legend. People visited, took photos, but never stayed long. There was something about the air, some echo of memory they couldn't explain, but the town endured. Not because it was perfect, but because it had. Remembered, it became the first place on Earth to write its own story, not one preserved by Anne. Outside eye, but one built from inside, dash out. It was the place that taught the universe a truth. Stories must be lived, not just observed, and so the final chapter ended. With a pen laid to rest, a dream remembered, and a town that once vanished, but came back whole.